Johnny Bench has tied it up. The Cincinnati Reds win the World Series in 4 straight. It was a sweep.
In the dirt, it's a wild pitch. Here comes Boston. The Reds win the pennant.
Perkins won the game.
That ball is fair. Cincinnati's ahead. 2 games to none.
Welcome Joe Landa to Cincinnati. Adam Dunn has done it again.
Benzinger backing and calling. And the 1990 World Championship belongs to the Cincinnati Reds.
Marty, yes. This is Adam from Milwaukee. Hey, Adam, how you doing? I'm good. How are you? Good. Do you think Scott Chatterbox is a good player?
Dunn up there with the bases loaded, the outfield deep and around toward right, and the 1-0 on the way to the plate. Swung on, long drive, right field, and this one belongs to the Reds.
And a high drive, hit back into deep right field. Junior has just knocked the door down to the 500 club.
Benson's first home run is a walk-off winner. That ball had a family.
And De La Cruz is, oh my goodness, look at this kid run. My, oh my, that is a triple.
Matt McClain's first big league bomb.
Spencer Steer's first big league hit is a home run to straightaway center field. Joey Votto's done it again.
The pitch. Votto swings high in the air. Right field. Yes! He pointed to the dugout to say, I told you. That is Joey Votto's 315th career go-ahead ribby. Only Johnny Bench had more as a Red.
And I can't tell you how much it means to play in front of everyone here in Cincinnati as a Red. What a gift. What a tremendous gift. So thank you. Thank you.
I think I can speak for all of Reds country. Joey Votto, thank you.
High drive. Left center field. Racing back to the line. Bourgeois. The Reds are National League Central Division champions. In the air, left center field. Did he? He did. He did. Reds win. Win. Line into right field. Genius, the first Red ever with 4 home runs in a game. Can you believe it? In the air, down the right field line. Doesn't have a chance. The Reds have won on a 3-run home run on opening day by Ramon Hernandez. A strike away and out away is Homer Bailey. Ground ball to third. Frazier gloves. Throw to first and Homer Bailey for the second time in his major league career has tossed a no-hitter. Oh, gosh. Oh, are you kidding me? Holy Moses, the second player in major league history to hit 7 home runs in the first 10 games. In the air, and the Reds win. What a dream beginning to the career of Jay Bruce.
Well, hey, what's going on? Nick Kirby here, joined by my pal Clay Snowden. Welcome to a special edition of Chatterbox Reds Live. Going to talk about the non-tender deadline coming up and some of the decisions weighing one of the first more important decisions of the offseason for the Reds. We'll get to Clay here in just a second, but as always, Chatterbox Reds proudly supported by Deep South Commodities. DSC is a leader in renewable commodities for biofuel production, specializing in used cooking oil collection, aggregation, and sales. Visit www.deepsouthcommodities.com for more information. Thanks as always to our friends at DSC. Well, Clay, my friend, how we doing? How's the offseason treating you?
Man, it's great. I was spending the day diving through some outfield options for the Reds and writing an article about that today, which should be out sometime this week. A little bit slimmer there than I had originally realized, and a lot to talk about there. But yeah, I'm going to cover it all in that article as well.
Well, we'll see where the night gets us. We might get into a little bit of that talk. I want to stick to the important script first. just because we are, kind of on a time crunch here with this deadline actually kind of snuck up on me. I'm actually going to go in reverse order here, Clay. I'm going to kind of give everyone a quick rundown of where we're at in the off season. So as mentioned, November 19th, that is the deadline for free agents to accept the qualifying offer. Nick Martinez is reported to going to be accepting the Reds qualifying offer. And then November 22nd, the deadline to offer a contract to club-controlled players. And then the non-tender deadline, not actually in this, but I think it's the 19th, right? Is that right? I don't know. It's in my other graphic. But the winter meeting is coming up the 9th through the 12th. That's when we really kind of expect the offseason to get hot and heavy. And then after that, it's usually pretty slow up until spring training. So, Clay, let's talk real briefly. I don't have a whole lot. I know we talked before. You didn't have a whole lot either about the Reds coaching staff. Announced Freddie Benavidez, Derek Johnson, Colin Cowgill, J.R. House all returning. The headliner, Brad Mills, Terry Francona's longtime friend, is going to be a co-bench coach, I guess, with Freddie Benavidez, who's also the field coordinator. Chris Valaika was, I guess, probably the biggest news in the coaching but that was announced weeks and weeks ago. I don't know. The only thing I was maybe a little bit surprised on, Clay, was I was surprised how many former coaches of the Reds that Francona kept. That was about the only surprise to me.
Yeah, that was about my only takeaway as well. When I saw this exact graphic come out, I was sitting there like, okay, which one of these names am I going to say? I played with them on MLB The Show years ago and whatnot, and not as many as I thought. But like you said, I truly don't have many takeaways. If we, like I know you and I are, but if fans like Terry Francona, then we should also like his ability to kind of pick and choose who he wants on his staff. I don't know a ton about a lot of these guys. I'm not going to act like it either. I guess we'll just see what it looks like once spring comes around.
Yeah, the only thing I'm really excited about is Derek Johnson coming back.
Yeah.
I think that's huge. I like Valaika. I'm not in love with Valaika. I'm kind of a wait and see, but overall, I think there's a lot of positives, and I think he has as good of an opportunity as anyone to come in and have as much of an influence as you can, which isn't a whole lot, I believe, with hitting coach. Brad Mills is interesting. I mean, Brad Mills ran the Cleveland Indians Guardians for weeks and weeks at a time when Terry Francona's had health issues. So if something like that was to pop up again, which is a possibility, just kind of giving Francona's, past struggles with health and all that kind of stuff, you do have a guy that is crazy amount of experience in managing games. He was a manager for the Astros for 3 years, but he was the top bench coach with Francona for decades. So you have that experience, and the only thing you don't, I don't think you're gonna have anyone that's gonna, you're not gonna have a situation where you're caught off guard. And I think Clay, the more guys on your bench that understand how to manage a big league game, it just creates less opportunities for something to go wrong, because you have guys that can get in your ear and say, hey, this is wrong. Because if anyone can make a mistake, anyone can overlook something, but when you have, really Benavidez has quite a bit of experience as well, the Reds shouldn't have that issue, at least.
Yeah, exactly. And, it's all about bringing in more experience. They went from a manager who didn't have experience at the major league level to a guy with just about as much as you can have. So I like where it sits. Again, we'll see what it looks like once we see them doing drills or get the quotes or, all of the little tidbits we get from spring training, and we'll see how it goes there.
Yeah. Well, the only devastating news of the offseason is that Charlie Goldsmith has left the Cincinnati Enquirer.
Oh, I know.
That was the nothing. Anything that happens the rest of the offseason is not going to hurt as much as that, in my opinion. Charlie was just incredible covering the Reds, and what a massive, massive void in Reds media.
Yeah, it's sad. I guess, it was you and I who ran into him at Reds Fest on the street and talked to him, and really nice guy. Always was very polite to everybody on Twitter and answered people's questions. And, a lot of people in his position don't do that. They don't have to do that. I know he was generous with his time to you over the years, and always liked him. I now don't have anybody to read at the Inquirer, and I'm disappointed about that. So I guess I'll be looking for different outlets.
Yeah. Well, best of luck. I hope somehow someone finds something for him to do in Cincinnati. I don't know. I don't know really how much more options there are out there in the sports world, but yeah, definitely going to miss Charlie. All right, well, let's get into it, Clay. Let's talk about the Rule 5 decisions that the Reds have to make. So we have that deadline coming up November 19th. The Reds have a plethora of players that they have to decide if they want to add to the 40-man roster. And if they do, they're protected and you can't lose them. If you don't protect them, someone could draft them in the Rule 5 draft. The Reds have not really lost a whole lot of players, Clay, in the Rule 5 draft. So it kind of maybe sometimes like feels like something really cool, but it doesn't honestly. Typically, you don't lose anyone. There's been a few examples of teams picking up a Rule 5 player and it really benefiting. But for the most part, this is something that's really cool, but doesn't actually end up amounting to much at the end.
It's very rare. I was looking through the Rule 5 draft picks from the past couple of years, and not only is it rare that somebody actually gets selected, sticks, and turns out to be good, but many times as I was just flipping through this list, I saw a name like Jordan Romano, and I was like, oh my gosh, he was a Rule 5 pick, and then realized, oh no, wait, if he was returned. So it was like the right player was selected, but they ended up just going straight back. It's tough. But still, it's a good opportunity to talk about some of these players who you may not always get the chance to talk about. I saw Bryce put Stuart Turner in there. I had forgot about him, the catcher. I think he was from the Twins that the Reds had and kind of kept on the roster all year, a few years back. But yeah, a couple of these names are at least worthy of discussion.
Yeah, Stuart Turner is probably the last Rule 5 player the Reds had that they try to keep like all season.
Yeah,
they've had a few pitchers that just didn't last very long.
And two guys as well that we know well. Connor Joe, right? He was selected by the Reds at one point, returned. And Jay Cave as well. Both long-term major leaguers, both Rule 5 draftees, both sent back to their original teams.
Yeah. Yes. So, and I'm looking here, article from Jonathan Mayo, the top 10 Rule 5 draft picks of the past decade. Mark Canha, Santander, ironically enough, Garrett Whitlock, Adubel Herrera, Brad Keller, Tyler Wells, Tommy Kahnle, Ryan Noda. I know you like him. Delano Shields Jr. and Trevor Stephan. So for the most part, not a whole lot of big success stories, but you never know. And I do think, though, I could see the Reds picking up a catcher in the Rule 5 draft. That's the one thing that I really could actually see happening on the other side. But real quick, Clay, just says, I know there's always, I know we always have quite a wide range of people who watch. So sometimes I just start talking and I assume everyone understands this whole process, but I don't know why I assume that, because I don't know why most people would actually want to understand this process. But players that are signed at 18 years or younger have to be added to the 40-man roster to be protected within 5 seasons. If they're 19 or older, they only get 4 seasons. So these are players that have reached that threshold. They've either been with the Reds 4 or 5 years, depending on where they were drafted. The Rule 5 draft takes place at the winter meetings, the second week of December. Not every club actually will make a selection. Sometimes clubs will pass, but they have to pay $100,000 for the player, and they have to keep that player on the roster the entire year. A lot of times teams will try – the pitchers are typically more valuable here. To be quite honest, Clay, a lot of times because A, they're easy to hide, and B, they get hurt a lot. And if a player gets hurt and they're on the IL, that counts as being on your roster. And if they make it through the roster the whole year, then you can send them back to the minors the next year. So any other takeaways before we jump into we'll run through these 10 players, then also talk about some of the other players that have reached this threshold just that are maybe worth mentioning.
Yeah, let's dive in.
All right, so the first one is Luis May, who I think me and you both, Clay, if you asked us back in May, pun intended, if Luis May would be a Rule 5 selection, we'd probably been like, no way. But May got a somewhat surprising promotion to Chattanooga, pitched pretty well in Chattanooga, and then has been one of the biggest stories in the Arizona Fall League, has incredible velocity, and at this point, seems like the one player that is the absolute 1,000% lock for the Reds to select in the rule or to add to the 40-man roster by next week.
And you got to, in a way, remember 99% of the time, the players that you're talking about have flaws, or else they would have been on the 40-man by now or have been traded. Like there's flaws with all of these players in the Rule 5. Luis May's flaw is controlling the zone at times, but he does pump gas. I mean, he has 177 strikeouts and 163 career innings in the minors, but that walks per 9 is still like around 7. So there is some issue there. He is a reliever. I would protect him. I've been a fan of his for a while now. I don't know if it'll ever click, but it's kind of like the idea of what I was thinking with like Joe Boyle, where it's like, okay, if it does click though, you could have something special. The difference there was starter versus reliever. I think you can put him on the 40-man, keep him on there. He doesn't even have to play for the Reds this year. He's 23 years old. Like, let him just continue to go through the minors, see if he can cut down on his walks. But yeah, I'm a big fan of Luis May, and I would add him. If we wanted to talk about corresponding 40-man moves, I know that they have some room, but there's definitely some pitchers that could fall off there pretty easily. So I don't think it would even be like a difficult transaction to do.
Yeah, we'll get to, maybe the cause and effect later. The Reds roster right now is at 36. So if you add the top 4, you don't actually have to take anyone off right now. Now, we know eventually the Reds are going to add other players. So there are going to be other players that are going to take off. And we'll talk about that here in a minute. But yeah, Luis May, I mean, he's a lock at this point. I mean, he would absolutely get selected. And that's the biggest key. It's not necessarily you're not ranking these players in terms of who's the best player, because, honestly, maybe Tyler Callahan would be number 1 overall, or even maybe Nestor Laurent might be higher up there, but it's who's going to get selected by a team, and some team would take a shot on Luis May and could hide them in their bullpen pretty much all year. So, the next one, Jose Acuna, a guy I really like, Clay. I've got to see him pitch in person a couple of times. He's had a lot of injuries, which has kind of held him back, but he definitely has the stuff. He's put up really good numbers really all throughout his minor league career. I feel pretty confident the Reds are going to keep him, but I feel less confident than May.
Yeah, I think, and just everyone needs to remember there's only about 12 to 20 players selected in a given year, it seems like. So is he one of those players? I don't think he would get selected. I think that they could get him through this season. Now, keep in mind that he's in the same boat next season as well, if he's still in the Reds organization and not added. I do think he kind of tailed off at the end of the year. I think the stat was 11 and a half ERA in September. I think he may have just burned out. I've watched him several times pitch. I think he has a really good slider. I don't know about the fastball, and I'm not even looking at any data or any shapes or anything, but just from the eye test, it looks to me that the fastball doesn't quite have the movement or shape that I think a major league fastball typically would need. Maybe there's something backing it up that says I'm completely wrong, but that's just what I've seen. I still think that he would end up being a better reliever if they can get him in that role eventually than a starter. But yeah, I think he's somebody who I would leave off. I don't think he would be selected either.
I don't know. He is in AAA. I mean, he did finish in AAA.
Yeah, he finished with
barely. I mean, he made a couple starts at the end. He's pitched pretty well overall in the Arizona Fall League. I think he's going to be protected. Again, I don't think it's as slam dunk as as Luis May. But the Reds have typically done 4. That's been about their number, 3 or 4. So that's probably what you would expect. Although I would say overall, Clay, this is probably the Reds' weakest Rule 5 option class in quite a long time.
I have like 2, maybe 3 on this list. And just keep in mind, putting them on the 40-man does not mean that they have to be on your 40-man roster for any, extended long, a full year or whatever, kind of like that rule is for if they were to be selected by another team. So you could put someone on your 40-man and DFA them like, middle of the season if it doesn't work out or whatever it may be if you need the roster spot. But yeah, I just wanted to mention that.
The next guy, Jose Franco, a guy I don't honestly know all that much about, Clay. He hasn't shown up on any prospect rankings. He had Tommy John surgery and missed all of 2023, but has a really good fastball. Looked like it's been up in the high 90s from Franco. He was specifically mentioned by Mark Sheldon as one of the top 4 candidates, which are in order if you're watching this, with the first 2, May and Acuna, that we've talked about, and now Franco. But it seems, it's just he hasn't pitched above Dayton, so that's why it's maybe it was a little bit of a surprise to see him on here. But typically, if Mark Sheldon got him on the list, probably a pretty good chance that the Reds are. And it seems like there's always that one surprising pitcher that gets selected to a 40-man roster, and this is probably the one this year.
Yeah, he had like 330 strikeouts in his career in the minor so far. So it was something wild like that. And I've only seen him pitch once or twice. Like, I know the name and I've seen him, but I really don't know much about him. So I'll side with you and whatever you saw or read from Mark.
Yeah, I mean, it's one cool thing about this, Clay, is we find out more about the Reds prospects and where the Reds actually view a lot of these guys from this. It kind of gives us a nice peek into that. But yeah, 330 strikeouts in 270 career minor league innings. So he certainly gets done there. Again, Mark Sheldon mentioned him as one of the 4, so that's why he's probably a very good chance that he's selected. The next one, a guy I really do love, in Tyler Callahan. I probably would put the odds of him of him added to the 40-man roster at about maybe 25-30%. I think it's more unlikely than likely, but it's not because of lack of skill. It's just, do I really see a team putting Tyler Callahan on their roster all year? Now, I know when I talked with your guy, Jack McMullen, I asked about Callahan specifically because he was out in the Arizona Fall League and saw Callahan play. Callahan feels like a guy that very well could get selected in the Rule 5 draft. Someone like a guy like Connor Joe with the Reds goes to a team in spring training and they like him, but they just can't justify putting a guy that barely has made it to AAA on their big league roster, and the Reds end up getting him back. I think that might be one of the more likely scenarios here for Callahan. A guy that I like, can play second base, can play left field, can really get on base, has some decent speed. A player that I really, I don't mind the Reds not putting him on, but man, I'll be really disappointed if somehow they lost him.
These are tough decisions. Every single year, there are a number of players we say, how could they leave them unprotected? They don't get selected. Same thing with DFAs, right? We always think, oh my gosh, how could you DFA this player? They get through. To me, like, Tyler Callahan looked good this year. He really looked good in the second half, I thought, and once he got to Louisville, and you can see the tools, and you can see like a path where he is a major leaguer. I don't think that path's in 2025. I'm still getting used to the new number there, but I don't think that's 2025, like opening day on someone's roster. I'm in the same boat as you, where he'll come in and like the players he's going to have to beat out are either going to be like the Santiago Espinals of other teams, or it's going to be the Nick Ahmed type invite to spring training vet. Like the Rule 5 guys, a lot of times like third in that pecking order. for teams, unless they're just completely, White Sox level and they're just willing to take anybody. The Tigers did that like 3 years in a row, not too long ago. Ultimately, I like the player. A little worried about what position he actually would play at the major leagues this season. I think he could be moving to the outfield. If they do that, then I'd want him to get a lot more reps in AAA. And I know he can do that on the 40-man, but ultimately I don't want to use the spot for him to protect him in December.
Yeah, I mean, a team like the White Sox would be the kind of team that would roll the dice and put him on there. But
Poor
you
guy.
think a team like the White Sox are probably going to find a player better because they're going to be picking at the top. I believe it's the same order as the draft lottery. Am I right on that? I'm looking at last year. The A's had the worst record in 2023, right?
Yeah,
They picked
I'm not
first,
100%
so
sure.
I'm assuming it looks like. I mean, I'm looking at the 2023 A's, Royals, Rockies, White Sox, Nationals. I'm assuming those were the worst teams in baseball in 2023. So yeah, I mean, again, a team like the White Sox, yeah. I mean, why wouldn't you roll the dice with Tyler Callahan? But they're going to be drafting high enough that there's probably another player that's probably a better prospect than Callahan.
And just keep in mind, 10 players were selected last year in the entire draft.
Yeah.
So when you're sitting here saying, not you personally, but the listener is sitting here saying, we got to protect, 6 of these people, they're all getting selected. Like, they just won't. They just won't. And it comes down to a numbers game. And a lot of it will factor into how much the Reds plan on adding this offseason. How many roster spots do they need? And the roster construction that comes with that.
But last point for me on Callahan, I love Callahan. I really think he actually probably has a chance of playing on the 2025 Reds. If an opportunity presents itself, maybe later in the summer, if he continues to perform well, because he was one of the Reds' better hitters in the minor leagues last year. He was hurt early in the year, and when he came back from like the middle of May through the end of the year, there could have been many minor league players that hit better than him last year. So I really like him. I don't think that they probably protect him, but if they do protect him, Clay, that to me is a sign that the Reds are even higher on him than I am, and I'll be really excited if that happens.
Yeah, I mean, people were excited about Jacob Hurtubise too, and I tried to pump those brakes, but man, Nick loves some Jacob Hurtubise too.
Hey, there's still time. There's still time, Clay. Although we're going to talk about it at the end, as he might be a guy that gets taken off the roster. We're going to run through the rest of these a little quicker, just because those are the 4. If anyone else outside of those 4 is selected, I would be very surprised. But again, as I mentioned, if they are, that's a sign that the Reds really view him a lot higher than the public does. Avon Johnson, a guy that's been on prospect rankings forever for the Reds, fell off and then had probably his best or most complete minor league season this last year. I don't think there's any way he's selected, but a player that I do like that has shown some signs of life and has maybe become a legitimate depth piece for the Reds in the minor leagues at the upper echelon, which is something that's desperately needed.
That's what I hope for him. Is he's one of those players that's in the minors for a long time with the Reds, like just kind of sticks around, finds a spot. He can play all over, switch hitter, infield, outfield. Had a really solid year, but ultimately there's absolutely no way that you can start putting more players on the 40-man, especially in positions that he's kind of in of a utility guy. There's just other players that need those spots.
Yeah. Avon Johnson definitely worth mentioning. I don't think he's going to be selected, but a guy I probably would have in my top 30 Reds prospects right now, maybe top 40. Yerlin Confidant, a guy that I do really love. Every time I've ever looked up StatCast numbers on the Daytona Tortugas, this guy has like 3 or 4 hard hit balls every game. This guy absolutely crushes the ball. But I have a hard time believing that a guy that hit 249 in low A is going to be selected in the Rule 5. But a player that is very sneaky in the Reds, minor league system. Kind of surprising that this guy's already Rule 5 eligible.
Yeah.
And it's just been so many injuries for him. That's why he's he's still in Daytona. But a guy that I wouldn't be shocked, Clay, if he does take a massive leap and starts moving his way up next year, if he is able to play like he played in the second half of 2024.
Crazy Tools, one of my favorite prospects to watch. I watched quite a bit of him this year in Daytona, and I think it's a boomer bust type profile. Like, I think it's a low percentage chance that he'll be a major leaguer, but if he is a major leaguer, it's probably pretty unlikely that he's below average major leaguer. That type of player where he's either good because everything clicks or it doesn't click enough and he's a complete mess. Definitely not getting selected. Absolutely no way.
Nestor Laurent. I don't think there's any way that he gets selected, but the Reds, I don't think they've announced yet a minor league pitcher of the year. If they had, it should be Nestor Laurent. This guy was incredible. He was the Florida State League pitcher of the year. Kind of came out of nowhere, and he doesn't have like good stuff. I think his fastball is like 92. But I was surprised. He actually had 109 strikeouts in 96 innings. So he did get a lot of swing and misses. I don't think you would expect as he progresses to see that. I don't think there's any way, but again, definitely a guy that needs to be mentioned on a list like this. Again, he's maybe one of those ones that out of left field, if we're really trying to find that sneaky one, maybe it's Laurent. I don't see it, but a guy that you definitely love having in your system right now.
Yeah, I don't see it either. And keep in mind, these guys can always get added after the Rule 5 as well. It's just simply protecting them from that draft. And I don't think, honestly, anybody else on this list would get protected. Andrew Moore, I know we'll talk about him a little bit, but he at least has some intrigue.
Javi Rivera, a guy that probably had a little bit of a disappointing year. Another nice starting pitcher with some upside. Don't really see a whole lot on him unless you have something on Javi Rivera. We'll move on. Andrew Moore is a little bit more intriguing. He's a little bit older, which is kind of, what maybe makes him a little more intriguing. Part of the return for Luis Castillo. He had a dominant run in the minors in the middle of the year. Someone who tracks every day. His end numbers didn't end up looking as great. He ended up with a 3.79 ERA. But 93 strikeouts in less than 60 innings. That's impressive. He's that reliever that maybe a team would try to sneak in. I don't see it, but if I'm trying to stretch and figure out who's this other guy, Andrew Moore might be number 5 for me in terms of possibilities.
See, I have him a little bit higher. I think it's more possible than some of the younger arms, only because getting those younger guys who may still have 2 years ahead, like that could be a next year decision. Like, I think he's much closer to the majors than the other mentioned besides May. So for me, I'm willing to add him. Like, if they need a spot, like if they don't plan on adding that many relief pitchers, I'm willing to add him. And if it means it doesn't go well and you DFA him, I mean, he's okay. Like, we had these conversations with Ryan Hendricks and those players of the world, right? Where they're kind of toss up. Will it work or will it not? Adam, figure it out. If you have to move on, there's always more. We're looking at 4 right now.
Yeah. And last, he just got on here just because he was the number 1 pick, Austin Hendrick. Somehow even a more disappointing season than he was a disappointing prospect coming into the year. Tough sledding for Austin Hendrick. Thankfully for the Reds, I don't think they have any worries of losing him in the Rule 5 draft. But I guess it's sad that a guy that was a first round pick isn't even a considerment for the Rule 5 draft. But yeah, tough sledding.
I don't have anything to add on him. No.
Yeah. Let's talk about just quickly some of the other names that are Rule 5 eligible. Again, we're not going to go into them very much. I'll read them, and then Clay, if you have anything to add on any of them, feel free. Hunter Parks, he's been hurt most of the year, but does have a really lively arm. I think he can hit up to 102. Don't think he's going to be, but he's Rule 5 eligible. Carson Rudd, Matt Nelson, the catching prospect that just hasn't really hit. Michael Trotwine, another catching prospect that just hasn't really hit. Sampson Schuster, TJ Sycamore, Francisco Urbaez, Ruben Ibarra, Austin Callahan, and Jose Torres. Unfortunately, Clay, when you kind of get to these players that are Rule 5 eligible, you kind of realize, you kind of look at some of these prospects and go, man, these were guys that were high up. Like Torres was a top prospect. Austin Callahan was a pretty high prospect. Matt Nelson, I think, was a second or third round pick. And unfortunately, they just haven't really panned out to this point. Now you're kind of once you've reached the stage, it's kind of like, yep, the realization it's probably not going to happen for most of these guys.
Yeah, exactly. And it's a lot of people's argument for why you should trade prospects. And we could go back and forth on that all day. Bottom line is it's a percentage game. You're going to have, 5% of your minor leaguers play in the majors that year? That's it. I mean, when you really think about it, all the levels and how many of those guys actually reach the majors in a season, it's low. Tough sport. A lot of these guys just will never make it. And that's not being crude. That's just being factual.
Yeah. Any other final thoughts on the Rule 5 before we talk about a couple other quick things and then wrap this up tonight? So the other interesting thing coming up that is coming up quickly, and this is kind of a weird year, Clay, that there's not really that many players that really are tough decisions. So on November 22nd, the Reds have at 8 p.m., this is normally one of like the biggest nights of the offseason, right, Clay? When you have to choose if you're going to tender guys' contracts or not. One of the more interesting ones in years past was Kyle Farmer. The Reds ended up non-tendering him and then signing him like an hour later. But the Reds have made some decisions that have kind of been surprising and snuck up on it. There's not really a whole lot this year. The only three, really, Clay, that I see that fit even a possibility. And I don't think any of these three are actually there, but the only three that I could even have any sort of possibility of the Reds deciding not to tender a contract, and by tendering a contract basically means you're guaranteeing at least part of their salary for 2025. But Santiago Espinal, Ian Jabot, and Jake Fraley are the three that maybe, but I don't see any of them. Maybe Jabot, if the Reds think there's something with his arm that we don't know about.
Yeah.
But that's about the only thing I see. I just don't see. I know MLB trade rumors said Espinal, but the Reds beat reporters have completely kind of squashed that idea from everything I've read. What's your take on that?
Yeah, I mean, I think you bring them all back. And we could argue, not we, but people may argue that Espinal's not worth that. Like a player of Espinal in his talent and his versatility may be worth $2.5 million. What's he projected? $3.5 million, whatever it is. Like it's clean. Just whatever the ARB number is for him, I would keep him around. He does have an option too. Like I know that's weird to pay someone that much and potentially option them, but I mean, you can do it and it could work out in your favor if you add elsewhere. It's not like you add Espinal and now you can't add anything else to his, position. So I say go ahead and add them all.
Yeah, I agree. And that's a really great point that you brought up about him having options, which I think makes him worth legitimately $1 million or $2 million more than some other players. Because if you go, sign a major league player, as your backup, type role, he's not going to sign a where you can sit him down to the minor leagues, right? Espinal, you have that ability. And again, just the Espinal that we saw from June through the end of the year, kind of after he got his footing in Cincinnati, was kind of the Espinal that he's been throughout his career. So it's not like he was not this 400 hitter that he was for a month or two, but the June through the end of the year, I mean, that's pretty much the player you get. And again, players that are league average or even slightly below league average that can play a lot of positions and play them well, they're valuable and they cost money. So yeah, I completely say keep Espinal. He's a good defender. I know that outs above average didn't love him. I don't really buy that for a guy that moved around as much as he did over 1 year. The career numbers are solid. Reds do not have enough good defensive players to be cutting.
I agree. Yeah. And I want Fraley back. It was really frustrating at times last year. I'm not giving him a starting role though. Like it still has to be earned, but like I'm not completely ruling out Jake Fraley, especially when you start working through the other options that they could sign and like, okay, how much better are they than this? Or how much more expensive would it be? Could that money be used elsewhere? And just working under the idea of this team has has a certain amount of money for this offseason, and where do you want to allocate those? Those conversations matter as well with all of this.
Yeah, Jake Fraley's a player that I not really sure how I feel about him.
Yeah.
But I he's going to be worth whatever his arbitration.
It won't be that high.
A team, and again, a team would trade for him at that price. They may not give you a ton, but they're going to trade for him. So the non-tender is not really a question in my opinion. Again, I had to really stretch just to get 3 people on here, and Jake Fraley was a stretch in my opinion. I wouldn't be opposed if the Reds decided to trade him and try to finagle another thing if they can. I just, when you kind of look at the outfielders like you were talking about at the beginning, you'll start to appreciate Jake Fraley a little bit more when you start diving.
Max Kepler and Jake Fraley. I mean, I know that they're different. Kepler's the better. I don't want to get into the direct comparison, but when I was looking at them side by side, I mean, do you know how many home runs Max Kepler hit this year?
Not many.
It was like 9. Like it wasn't anything great, and I know that he can be better, but man, I'm just looking at them all, and I'm looking at like how much more it will cost, and like what if they use that money towards a relief pitcher or whatever it may be. I start thinking like, we as Reds fans would say, hey, here's somebody with some more potential, this, and pick it apart like we do. He'd be in that boat, I think.
Yeah. And Jake Fraley, I mean, he only hit 5 home runs in 116 games, and he still was almost a league average hitter. Like he had a career high batting average. So it was just such a weird year for Fraley, and there was obviously so much going on with him behind the scenes. The fact that he still had a 277 batting average, a 330 on base percentage, I think there was just something fluky with the power.
There was a wrist injury, was it?
Yeah.
Whatever it was. That had to have been it. I mean, there's no way that the power just leaked out like it did in one offseason.
Yeah. Again, if you would have told me or you, Jake Fraley's going to hit 5 home runs in 116 games, what's his WRC plus? We'd probably have been like 75, 80? No, it's 95. I mean, he was still close to a league average hitter with absolutely no power. So I think I'm actually a little more, I would be fine with him being a platoon starting role in 2025. We might differ a little bit there, but again, if the Reds can find a creative way to improve that position and move Fraley, I'm not against it either. But again, you have to kind of see what the move and then the next move is, and you have to feels like you have to make like 3 or 4 moves before Jake Fraley becomes expendable.
Yeah.
So, okay, what else do we have on here? Potential roster cuts. These are players that this decision is not going to need to be made anytime soon. But as we mentioned, the 40-man roster right now is at 36. Let's say the Reds add 3 players. It's at next week for the Rule 5 deadline. That's going to get them up to 39. So obviously we expect the Reds to add a couple players this offseason. So do the math. You're going to have to cut 3, 4, 5, maybe even more players. Reds also, I think, are going to trade some big league players. I think the Reds will trade big league players this offseason. I think they'll trade multiple big league players this offseason. That's my prediction. But these are the players that are still in pre-arbitration, so they don't have to be tendered a contract. They're going to make $800,000 next year, but players that could get cut. And I'm just going to read through the list, and then Clay you can chime in on anyone you want here. So first is my guy Stuart Fairchild, Casey Legumina, Lyon Richardson, Yasver Zulueta, Jacob Hurtubise, and Joey Weimer. Clay, for me, I think Weimer's probably the only one that I feel is safe out of that group.
You would think, just because they just recently acquired him in a trade, and he has some prospect pedigree and whatnot. If anybody from that list was moved on from, it was because somebody was brought in. Not even Rule 5 guys. I don't think anyone from that list is getting cut to add someone for the Rule 5. So you got to remember, being upset about that move, is that going to be countered by the happiness, or whatever you want to call it, of adding a better player?
Yeah.
So when I say I'm willing to move on from Stuart Fairchild, which I know I'm not the biggest Fairchild fan, and I've corrected myself on that numerous times, but if moving on from him means that you can get a replacement for him, then I'm okay with it. I don't want to just like cut Stuart Fairchild today just because, I just don't want him on the roster. But it's that give and take, and I could see any of those guys being upgraded from, to be honest with you.
Yeah, exactly. And I'm surprised that Fairchild's still in pre-arbitration. It feels like he's been in the league so much, but I guess he's just been optioned so many times.
He's
still
he was an art by now.
That's what I thought. Well, that's what I thought. And I thought, oh, Stuart Fairchild's got to be making $3 million next year. And I was like, yeah, I think the Reds will probably cut him for that. And I was like, oh, he's still $800,000. And when he all of a sudden becomes a lot more valuable at $800,000 versus $2.5 million. But he is out of options. That's the biggest negative on Stuart Fairchild, is that he has no options. A guy like Weimer still has options. Hurtaby still has options. Hines and Dunn, who I didn't put on this list because I don't really think there's any way, but you could maybe flinch and have them be a possibility. Those guys still have options. And that, unfortunately, is what's working against, or I guess for Stuart Fairchild, because I guess if he gets cut, he's probably going to find his way on a big league roster for at least the White Sox or someone.
Yeah, and losing someone like a Stuart Fairchild is just part of roster construction. A lot of these role players are only here for a short amount of time, a year, 2, 3 years. Like, that's pretty normal to have those players moving on and off rosters fairly often. So I don't think it's anything like crazy or anything that he necessarily did wrong. I do think, as much as we like platoons and believe in certain platoons, when you are completely useless against the opposite of what you platoon, that does affect you as a player. The idea of he was put in bad positions is part of his job, though. When you're using a roster space as the backup outfielder, like, injury happens, like, you're going to have to perform. It's okay to be much better against one, but when you're useless against the other, it makes you kind of a difficult player. And for Stuart Fairchild, he's really bad against righties. He brings speed, brings defense. However, if someone gets injured and he's got to play for 3 days straight against righties, like, it's a disaster.
And honestly, one other thing about Fairchild that works against him is he's been hurt a lot. For a platoon player, he's had to spend a lot of time on the IL himself. So, again, I like Stuart Fairchild. I think he got a bad rep for a long time. I'm kind of glad that he kind of was able at times last year to kind of showcase that he's
I was part of that group.
He's a big league player. I just don't know if he's a big league player on a team where the Reds don't have like that margin for error. But we'll see.
It's also a spot that you can, and I know a lot of people hate talking about this or hearing about it, but that's a spot you can upgrade with, like, legit winner, proven vet type clubhouse presence if you want. Like, if you wanted to go out and kind of get the aging vet who's won and you want to surround it, and it feels like that's something Terry Francona would want. I'm not saying he's old school, but like, I feel like he's old school enough to want that type of a leader in the locker room. And maybe there's somebody he knows that from, previous teams that he wants to fill that role. Like, that's another thing we have to consider, is this manager who's going to be using these players is going to view them differently and use them in different situations than what we have experienced the past few years. So what does that mean when all of this comes in? I guess the question is, how often has Terry Francona had this heavy of a platoon bat on his roster in that type of a role? It's stuff like that.
All right, Clay, let's wrap this up with a little fun. I didn't prepare you for this. I'm going to make you kind of do this on the fly. I want you to give me a couple players that you would like to see the Reds add this offseason, trade, free agents, whatever. Just get kind of spitball a couple that are coming to your mind that are realistic. Not Juan Soto, because obviously Juan Soto would be number one. A couple players that you think the Reds should add, that are realistic as an actual possibility this offseason. If you want me to go first, I'm happy to go first.
Yeah, you go first.
Okay. So here's my fix the offense position players. You sign Tyler O'Neill. I think he's the one free agent that I look and I go, he's the one that fits the Reds the best. Years, dollars, everything in between. Tyler O'Neill's the one guy that I think the Reds have to get. Not have to get, but really I think should get. Sneaky guy, and I know I'm going to make people mad. Sneaky guy that I think the Reds should add, and this would lose my guy Stuart Fairchild. Harrison Bader. I think Harrison Bader as your backup fourth outfielder, center fielder.
He's going to cost too much.
Maybe, I don't know. He was benched in the playoffs from the Mets. He was a 2-year, $20 million deal. Was that
10 mil a year? I bet you he gets around that or 8 or something. That will be.
I think he's worth 8. I like him at 8 more than some of the other names that people like that have better offensive numbers. The Reds need a great defensive outfielder to throw in this mix because they have a lot of bad defensive They have a lot of bad defensive players overall. Harrison Bader, he's my sneaky one. My last offensive upgrade, and this is a little bit of a finagling here, is I'm going to trade for Alec Boehm if he's on the market. I love that he only has 2 more years left of control, so you're not committing like 5 years to a third baseman because I do not want anyone in the way of Noel Marte when he figures it out, because I believe he will. And Boehm has the ability to go to first base. Trade, I think could maybe work for both teams. Steer for Boehm. And maybe the Phillies have to throw something else in because Steer has more years. That's my move. And then on the pitch, I think the Reds are going to look for guys like some bounce back pitchers, like a Dylan Floro maybe is a guy. I think there's going to be a couple relievers like that. And I think that's my Nick Kirby realistic-ish moves that I think the Reds should make.
I think mine, first off, this is a Steer jersey. I'm a big Steer fan, so I'm not trading him. I don't care. I actually think that he's not all that different as Alec Boehm. Like, I'm trying to picture Alec Boehm in Cincinnati and what that might look like, but a fun thought process nonetheless. My guy who I want is Michael Conforto. I've talked myself into Michael Conforto. Probably too much because I was on the phone with Ryan Finkelstein, who covers the Mets for Locked On Mets and Just Baseball. And he has been telling me for years that Conforto's swing is perfect for Great American. The Reds should get him. The Reds should get him. The Reds should get him. So this is the year that they get him. I don't think he is, early career Conforto anymore. He had an injury before, I guess it was 2 seasons before. But man, I like the guy. I think that he could put up pretty good numbers. He would have had 30 home runs if he played all of his games in Great American Ballpark this year. Bring me Michael Conforto.
I like it.
Who else do I want? Let me think. I was not prepared for this, but
I know. I'm sorry. I kind of threw it on you.
I will say, okay, so Tyler O'Neill and Teoscar Hernandez, between those two, you won't like this, but I'll actually go Hernandez. I'm concerned about O'Neill's injury past. I mean, it's been constant with him, and it's not, shoulder surgery out for 18 months, and it looks like 2, whatever. It's just a lot of different things. I'm concerned about that. I saw that it's likely he gets 5 years. I don't want to commit 5 years to a guy with a lot of strikeout problems, a ton of power. His defense has been slipping. I don't know. There's just a lot of moving parts there. Teoscar Hernandez, to me, is really solid, has put up great numbers year after year, professional hitter. I know both of these guys are not plus fielders, and neither is Conforto. But give me Teoscar over O'Neill, even with the age difference, which I'm not forgetting about. There's a 2-3 year age difference there. I don't care. Teoscar would age well and hit well in Cincinnati.
Okay, I like it. I've been on the Conforto train too for a long time. That it kind of feels like it's gone and past, which is why he'll somehow find his way in Cincinnati this offseason. But that is the kind of player that I do think could really hit well at GABP. A guy that you might be buying at the right time on, which I think is important, and which is why I'm not on the Santander train. like everyone else. If the Reds signed him, I would be thrilled for 2025. Like, it would be awesome. But there's just a lot of red flags there with committing that kind of years and that kind of money that I feel like that's not a risk that I think the Reds should be taking.
I was always on board with him when I thought his price would be like 12, 13 million, 14, 15. Then it's like he just can't. And that was like earlier in the year. And I was so excited. I was like, yeah, dude, this is the guy I want. And then it just kept home runs going up and the prices going up and the years are getting longer. And I was like, I probably need to pump the brakes there. Give me Michael Conforto. I think you can get him for 2 years? What is that what you think is?
Yeah, I think so.
Reasonable?
Something like that. Yeah.
I like that. I like Teoscar. Don't have to get both. Getting one would be great.
Yeah, and you probably would have to do like an opt-out for Conforto, but I don't care. Everyone gets so mad at these opt-outs. I'm like, okay.
Oh, you mean the player played really well for your team?
The player played really well and opts out. Now we don't have to pay him a longer contract. Like, you would sign every single one of these players to a 1-year contract if you could. Like, the opt-outs, they're great for the players, but it doesn't, like, so what? Go sign someone else. Like,
yeah, I also think it's going to start happening at some point when the prove it deal, 1-year prove it deal used to be reserved for like bad teams and like players who have had a lot. There's a lot more players doing kind of 1-year prove it deals when it's like, I'm going to go to a pretty good team and still do the prove it deal thing. I think that the way that the small markets are going to start getting riskier but better value or giving the prove it players 2-year deals. So rather it be like the Tyler Mahle situation where he was injured this year, the beginning of the year, the Rangers still signed him. Like those type of deals where like the small market teams may have to start doing the extra year, but spreading out the costs a little bit more. I don't know. I was trying to get my mind wrapped around how they would do it. And like Conforto or whoever, like even if they wanted a 1-year deal, like I think the Reds could pull off a 2-year deal by just, giving some security to somebody.
All right, Clay. Well, I know that you have to run. I really do appreciate your time as always. I'll let you hop off. I got to read the 988 ad read because I forgot to do that to our friends at 988. But Clay, I really do appreciate you as always, my friend. So if you need to jump off, jump off. If not, I'm going to talk about 988. We want to remind you can call or text 988 anytime, day or night. The 988 Suicide Crisis Lifeline is a place to get support for anything related to mental health. Whether it's an immediate crisis, simply wanting to find out how to connect with care, or anything in between. The 988 Suicide and Crisis Lifeline is a 100% confidential and secure way to connect. To connect, call or text 988 or visit mantherapy.org to get help. It is okay not to be okay. All right. Well, thanks so much, everyone, for tuning in to Chatterbox Reds here today. We'll look to do some more content, especially when we get closer to the winter meetings. So stay tuned for that. All kinds of other great content over here on Chatterbox Sports. Of course, Off the Bench, 10 a.m. to noon. The guys talk about all things Cincinnati sports and more. Be sure to check that out. Also available everywhere you get podcasts. Chatterbox Bengals is really picking up. The guys will be doing a show Thursday night. They do a live show Tuesdays at 6, Thursdays at 7, and then Jacob is live for the entire Bengals game, and then they do a post-game show with our guy Craig after the Ravens game. 15,000 people tuned into that. How about that? That was pretty cool. So be sure to check out Chatterbox Bengals on our YouTube page, also everywhere you get podcasts, and also Chatterbox Bearcats. The guys there live after every UC football and basketball game. They're really growing a lot, so be sure to check that out if you are a Bearcats fan. Again, thanks as always, everyone, for tuning in. I hope that you have a great week. We'll talk again soon, and as always, when news breaks, we'll be here as soon as we can. Have a great night, day, whenever you're listening to this. Go Reds.